Welcome to my channel. Tonight's story begins in silence, the kind that only exists when you're truly alone. In the dark of an aging space station orbiting the dead moon of Vera, a man named Dr. Simon Hale lay in his bunk, listening to the hum of the air recyclers as he drifted into uneasy sleep. He was the last human assigned to the outpost, the final caretaker of a forgotten research station that the Galactic Council had deemed non-essential. His colleagues had been recalled years ago, leaving behind a skeleton crew of automated drones and silent corridors. But Simon stayed, partly out of duty, partly because he had nowhere else to go. He had grown used to the emptiness, to the sound of his own voice echoing through the metal halls. Every light flicker, every groan of shifting panels, every hum of machinery had become familiar. But this night was different. As his eyelids grew heavy, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that he wasn't alone. He dismissed it, told himself it was exhaustion, and fell into deep, dreamless sleep. Yet, somewhere beyond the walls, something ancient stirred. When he awoke, the station was dark. The hum of the generators was gone, replaced by the faint sound of static coming from the intercom system. For a moment, he thought it was a dream. Then, from the far corner of his room, he heard breathing. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Simon froze. His pulse pounded in his ears as his eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lights. There was no one there, nothing but shadows and the faint mist of recycled air. He stood carefully, reaching for his wrist terminal to activate the internal lights. They flickered, sputtered, and died again. "Computer status report," he said. But there was no response, only the static. He moved toward the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the manual override. Then, through the speakers came a whisper. Not mechanical, not human. "You woke too soon." His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a recording. Someone, or something, was speaking to him. The voice carried a strange echo, like multiple tones layered together, neither male nor female. He stared at the console, trying to locate the signal, but the voice only laughed softly. "You shouldn't be here, human." Panic gripped him. He slammed the door control, forcing it open, and stepped into the corridor. The lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows along the walls. Everything felt wrong. The air was thicker, heavier, and the temperature had dropped. The corridors he'd walked 1,000 times felt foreign now, unfamiliar. His breath came out in clouds. He ran toward the command center, but when the doors opened, he stopped cold. The observation window, which once looked out into the dark void of space, now glowed with an eerie blue light. Outside, floating silently above the station, was a massive structure, shaped like an endless ring, rotating slowly, emitting faint pulses of energy. It wasn't council technology. It wasn't anything he had ever seen. The station's sensors were offline, but the air itself vibrated with its presence. The voice returned, louder this time, filling the entire room. "We have watched you, Simon Hale of Earth. You dream loud for a species that was meant to fade." He backed away, heart hammering. "Who are you?" he whispered. The lights flickered violently, and for a moment he saw it. A shadow forming in the center of the room, tall, shifting, its outline rippling like water. "The ones who waited," it said. Simon stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the console. His mind raced. The Galactic Council had long spoken of ancient entities, remnants of civilizations older than recorded time, beings that existed before stars even had names. They were myths, but myths didn't speak. Myths didn't appear in the dark. "What do you want?" he demanded. The shadow tilted its head, and though it had no face, he could feel it studying him. "To remember," it said softly, "and to see if humanity remembers too." Then the shadow reached out, not physically, but through the very air around him. The lights dimmed again, and the temperature dropped until frost began to form on the metal panels. His vision blurred as the room spun. "Remember what?" he managed to choke out. The entity's voice deepened, reverberating through the walls. "What you were, before you forgot." He awoke again, gasping for air. The station lights were back, glowing faintly golden. The hum of the generators had returned. For a moment he thought he'd imagined everything. But when he looked at his wrist terminal he saw the time. It had jumped forward 3 days. His memories between those hours were blank. He tried to access the station logs, but the system denied his command. Every file related to that period was encrypted under a code he didn't recognize. When he checked the external sensors, the alien ring was gone. No trace, no readings, nothing. Yet something had changed. He felt it in his bones, in the way the lights flickered when he passed, in the way his reflection lagged slightly behind him in the viewport. Then he noticed something else. Messages written in frost along the window, letters forming in slow, deliberate strokes. You are not alone. His heart pounded. It wasn't a hallucination. Someone or something had touched the ship and him. He began recording a log, his voice unsteady. If anyone finds this, the station isn't empty. There's something here. It spoke to me. But even as he spoke, the air shimmered again. The console crackled, and the voice returned, calm and curious. Do you still think you are alone, human? Simon froze. What are you? The answer came like a whisper through a hurricane. A mirror. The temperature dropped again, and the lights dimmed to red. He turned toward the viewport and saw his reflection, but it wasn't moving with him. It stood still, watching. Its eyes glowed faintly blue. You dream of stars, the reflection said. You build, you destroy, and you forget. You call it progress. We called it survival. Simon stared, unable to move. We? He asked softly. The figure smiled faintly. You call us alien. But we were you, long before your kind learned to walk. The words froze him. That's impossible, he whispered. We come from Earth. The being's voice deepened. And before Earth from us. You are our echo, the younger song of an older race. Simon staggered backward, shaking his head. You're lying. But as he spoke, the ship's systems began to replay data. Images of star maps he didn't recognize. Records written in an unknown language that his terminal couldn't translate. They appeared not as symbols but as memories, flooding his mind in flashes of light. He saw cities made of glass, oceans that glowed like fire, and beings of light walking among stars. Then destruction, wars that tore galaxies apart, the birth of chaos, the silence that followed. And among it all, a single seed, a spark cast into the void, carrying the DNA of that lost civilization. The seed found a new world, a blue planet under a yellow sun. Earth. Humanity wasn't born, they were reborn. We left our memory in you, the voice said, growing faint. We have waited for the day you would awaken it. Simon fell to his knees, the images still flashing in his mind. Why show me this? He gasped. The reflection stepped closer. Because you are the first to dream again. As the vision faded, the station fell silent once more. The lights returned to normal, and the frost melted away. Simon sat trembling, his breath uneven. The entity was gone, but the knowledge it left behind burned within him. Humanity had not been the galaxy's newcomers. They had been its forgotten founders. Their arrogance, their wars, their search for power had erased their own history. And now, the old ones, whatever fragments of them remained, had come to remind him. When the Galactic Council finally re-established contact days later, their transmission was routine. Outpost 91. Report status. Simon stared at the console for a long time before replying. Humanity's history is incomplete, he said quietly. We were never alone, and we never will be again. Years later, scientists would recover fragments of his recordings, but much of what he said was corrupted, lost in data storms. Still, one phrase endured across all archives, a message that would haunt every species that heard it. They're watching when we sleep, and from that day forward, the Galactic Council banned all human deep space isolation missions, calling them psychologically unsafe. But among humans, his story spread like wildfire. They called it the Awakening, a tale that reminded them of what they were capable of and what they were destined to become. Thank you for listening. If this story made you wonder about what watches from the dark between the stars, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Join me again for more HFY sci-fi stories, where humanity's past and future collide, and where the silence of space always hides something waiting to be seen. When Dr. Simon Hale finally regained his senses, the light outside the viewport was different. The station's orbit hadn't changed, but the stars seemed sharper somehow, colder. His body ached as if he'd been asleep for a century, and when he moved, every muscle resisted. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked like rusted metal. The silence pressed against him, heavy and suffocating. The emergency console blinked with faint amber warnings. Life support nominal. AI core inactive. Manual override required. It was strange. The system should have automatically rebooted within hours. He touched the screen, but the response lagged, like the station was waking up reluctantly, as if it too had been dreaming. He stood and crossed the cabin. Everything around him felt unfamiliar, rearranged just slightly out of place. The tools on his workbench, the photographs of Earth, even his jacket folded neatly over the chair though he didn't remember touching it. His head throbbed with a dull pain that pulsed in rhythm with the flickering lights. He tried to convince himself it was just isolation sickness or oxygen imbalance, but then he saw the writing again. Letters traced faintly in the thin film of frost across the viewport. You were chosen to remember. He stumbled back, his heart pounding so hard it drowned out every sound. For a moment he thought it must be a hallucination, a side effect of carbon buildup in the filters. But when he brushed his hand over the glass, the frost didn't smear. It deepened, spreading in delicate spirals like living veins of ice forming around his fingertips. "Computer diagnostic," he said, his voice shaking. Still no response. He moved to the AI terminal and manually rebooted the core. It hummed weakly, lights stuttering back to life, and then a cold, familiar voice emerged. Not the station's usual AI, but something else, a tone that sent chills down his spine. "You woke again, Simon Hale." He froze. It was the same voice that had whispered to him before, the same layered tone, human and not. "Who are you?" he demanded. The voice seemed to smile through static. "We are what came before. You were meant to sleep longer, until you remembered." He clenched his fists, trying to keep his fear from surfacing. "Remember what?" The station's lights dimmed, and outside the viewport, the stars pulsed once. Synchronized, deliberate, unnatural. "The debt humanity owes the stars," it said quietly. He ran his hand through his hair, pacing. "No, that's impossible," he muttered to himself. "This station's outside known council monitoring lanes. There's no transmission range here. You can't be real." The voice replied almost gently. "Real is only what you have not yet understood." Then, before he could respond, the AI screen flickered to life, displaying something that made his breath stop. A human face. Not his own, not anyone he knew. It was old, impossibly old, with eyes like burning suns and skin that shimmered faintly as if made of energy. "You left us behind," the being said. "Your kind forgot. We did not." Simon felt his throat close. "You're saying you're human?" The being smiled faintly, and the light in its eyes dimmed. "We were once. Long before your species called itself humanity. You are the fragments that survived." He shook his head. "That's not possible. There's no record of a pre-human civilization." The image tilted its head. "You destroyed your own record. It was necessary, so that you could begin again without the burden of what you had done." The room seemed to darken as the being spoke. The air thickened, every breath colder than the last. "We built the stars," the voice said. "We shaped worlds, moved suns, and called ourselves gods. But gods are only mortals who forget humility. We consumed, we ruled, we waged war. The galaxy remembers the fire we unleashed. And so, when it ended, we buried our memory in you." Simon stared, unable to move. "Why tell me this now?" he whispered. "Because the cycle begins again," the voice said softly. "We have felt your wars across the void, the way you spread, the way you consume. You are becoming what we once were." Simon turned away, shaking his head violently. "No, humanity has changed. We've learned. We've joined the council. We work for peace." The entity's voice echoed around him, mournful and knowing. Peace is only the quiet between storms. You cannot see it, but we can. You dream of conquest even when you speak of unity. You build weapons beneath the promise of science. You are us, repeating the song. Simon gripped the console tightly, his knuckles white. If that's true, he said, his voice shaking with both fear and anger, then why come to me? Why not warn the council? The figure's image flickered. Because they would not listen. They do not hear the old voices anymore. But you were awake when the veil shifted. You heard us. He felt dizzy, the weight of their words pressing into his skull. What do you want from me? The voice paused, and for a moment the silence felt alive. We want you to remember so you may warn them, so you may change what we could not. Then the station trembled. Lights flashed red, alarms blared, and the holographic image began to fracture. They have found us, the voice said, its tone suddenly urgent. The council listens even when it pretends not to. The walls rippled with light, and outside, faint shapes appeared against the stars. Council probes, scanning, transmitting. Simon tried to regain control of the system, but the entity overrode his commands. Wait, he shouted, but the voice had turned to a whisper again. Sleep now, Simon Hale. Sleep, and remember. He woke on the floor of his quarters, coughing, disoriented. The alarms were gone. The station hummed normally again. The frost had melted, and the view outside showed nothing but the cold serenity of space. For a moment he thought it was all a dream, but his terminal beeped softly. He looked down and saw a file labeled simply Echo. It wasn't in the system's directory. He opened it, and a series of coordinates appeared, millions of them, each corresponding to worlds scattered across the galaxy. The file name glowed faintly, and below it, a single line of text read, "Find them before they awaken." His pulse quickened. "Find who?" he whispered, but the terminal offered no answer. The implication struck him like gravity itself. The old ones, the ones that came before, they hadn't all vanished. Some were sleeping, and humanity, unknowingly, might be the key to waking them. He backed away from the terminal, the horror and wonder mixing inside him until he could barely think. "No," he said quietly. "It can't be." But as he turned toward the viewport, something vast moved against the stars. A shadow, immense and alive, coiling just beyond the range of light. For a fleeting moment, its surface shimmered like metal, and 1,000 eyes blinked open in the dark, each one glowing faint blue, the same color as the frost that had covered his window. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the void, leaving only silence behind. Simon fell to his knees, trembling. He didn't know what frightened him more, the thought that he'd gone mad, or that everything he'd just seen was real. Somewhere deep in his mind, the voice whispered one last time, distant but unmistakable, "They are watching, even when you dream." And from that day forward, Simon Hale never slept easily again. The following night was different. Simon couldn't tell if he had actually fallen asleep or if the world around him had simply changed without warning. One moment he was staring at the dim light above his bunk, counting the seconds between the faint clicks of the air recycler, and the next, the entire station was silent. Not broken, not malfunctioning, just utterly, impossibly silent. He sat up slowly, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The console across the room glowed faintly, lines of alien symbols scrolling across it. He rubbed his eyes, trying to wake himself, but the cold bit into his skin like needles. He knew then that this wasn't a dream. He was awake, but reality had shifted into something that didn't belong to him anymore. He stood, the floor freezing under his bare feet, and reached for the console. The text changed as he approached, reorganizing itself into Terran Standard. The words pulsed softly. "We remember. Do you?" A low hum filled the room. Not sound, vibration. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating deep in his chest. The lights above flickered violently, and when they steadied, he was no longer in his quarters. The walls had vanished, replaced by an endless expanse of silver mist and faintly glowing shapes that pulsed like living stars. He spun around, trying to find the edge of the room, but there was nothing, just infinite distance. His voice echoed as he shouted, "Where am I?" The answer came not in words but in feeling, a pressure in his mind that carried intent. Between what is real and what you deny. He staggered back, clutching his head. "Stop it," he whispered. "Stop talking like that." But the presence persisted, shaping thoughts out of his fear. "You sought knowledge of the stars, human. You measured them, charted them, named them, but you never listened to what they whispered back." Simon turned in circles, heart pounding. "Show yourself," he shouted. The mist stirred, condensing into a form that flickered between shapes. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes a vast, shifting figure of light. When it spoke again, the air itself trembled. "We were the architects." Simon frowned, his breath shallow. "Architects of what?" The figure moved closer, its light reflecting in his eyes like the glow of a dying star. "Of everything you now call civilization. Before the council. Before humanity. Before memory itself." He shook his head violently. "No, that's impossible. The Galactic Council's oldest records go back nearly 50,000 years. The being's tone deepened. 50,000 years of ignorance. We built galaxies while you were still dust beneath oceans. You are not the first. You are the echo." The words hit him like a blow. "Then why are you here? Why now?" he asked, his voice cracking. The figure's form shimmered, its edges flickering like the surface of disturbed water. "Because you are waking up, Simon Hale. Humanity is beginning to remember what it was, and that cannot go unnoticed." He tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The mist thickened around him, filling his lungs with cold. "You're lying," he gasped. "Humanity evolved on Earth. We know our origin." The entity's laughter reverberated through the void, a sound that seemed to come from inside his skull. "Evolved? No, you were guided. A spark planted in the dark by those who came before, so that when the stars grew quiet, the song would continue." Images flooded his mind, worlds bathed in golden light, beings of fire and thought shaping stars with their bare hands. Then came war, whole systems burning, the architects tearing each other apart, their creations screaming as civilizations collapsed in firestorms of their own making. He saw the last of them, a woman made of light, launching a crystalline seed into space, whispering a single word before vanishing into the void. "Begin." The visions faded, and he was back in the mist, trembling. "You created us?" he whispered. "Created, reborn, it matters not. You carry our mistakes in your blood." The mist began to churn, and suddenly, he was back in his quarters, gasping for air. The frost had returned, crawling across the floor, over the walls, forming delicate patterns that looked almost like constellations. His terminal beeped weakly, displaying fragmented data, energy spikes, spatial distortions, quantum anomalies. The readings made no sense. He sank into his chair, shaking. "This isn't real," he whispered. But then he noticed something. Etched into the frost on his table were coordinates. Not random ones, real, measurable coordinates, located far beyond known council space. He uploaded them into the star map, and when the visualization appeared, his blood ran cold. The pattern wasn't just coordinates. It was the shape of a spiral galaxy, drawn perfectly, every arm labeled with markings that predated any known language. At the center was a single symbol, the mark of Earth. He stared at the image for hours, his thoughts spiraling into chaos. If what the entity said was true, then humanity's origins weren't confined to Earth. They were the continuation of something far older. But that wasn't possible. The council would have known. Someone would have found proof. He stood suddenly, pacing. "They erased it," he muttered. "They had to have erased it." The realization struck him with a chill deeper than fear. The council's secrecy, their resistance to human expansion, their constant warnings against exploring deep sectors, they weren't protecting humanity from danger. They were protecting the galaxy from humanity. Because if humans remembered what they once were, if they awoke fully, the balance would shatter. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The station's comms flickered to life. Static filled the air for several seconds before a voice broke through. A voice he recognized instantly. It was the entity again. "You have seen enough," it said, its tone quieter now, almost sorrowful. "You cannot unlearn what you know." Simon pressed his hand to the console, trembling. "Why show me this? Why me?" The response came like a whisper across a storm. "Because you are the first who listened. You are the bridge between what was and what will be." Then, the entire station shook violently. Red lights flared across the walls, alarms screaming. He rushed to the viewport and froze. A council dreadnought had dropped out of hyperspace, its colossal shadow swallowing the station. "This is Galactic Council Vessel Adrastea." A mechanical voice boomed over the comms. "Unidentified transmission detected. Dr. Hale, power down your systems and prepare for boarding." Simon's pulse spiked. They had detected the signal, the one from the architects. "You can't let them find you," he whispered. The entity's voice returned, calm amidst the chaos. "They already have. But it is not us they fear. It is you." The lights flickered again, and the entity's form shimmered faintly in front of him, just for a moment, like a reflection in rippling water. "They will silence you," it said, "as they silenced the others before you." The door control sparked. Council troopers were docking. "What do I do?" Simon gasped. "Hide? Run?" The figure tilted its head. "You do what we could not choose. Decide if your species will remain blind or face what sleeps beneath its skin." The air shimmered again, and the entity faded. The door exploded inward, flooding the room with blinding light. Armed soldiers in reflective armor swarmed in. "Dr. Hale, stand down," one shouted. Simon raised his hands, but his eyes were locked on the viewport. Outside, the stars pulsed again, forming faint geometric patterns in the dark, a language written across the heavens. The troopers restrained him, forced him to the floor, but his voice rose over their orders. "They're coming back," he shouted. "They were us. They made us." The lead trooper slammed a stun baton into his ribs, silencing him. Everything went black. When he woke, he was in a sterile medical chamber, bound to a reclined seat. Council officers stood behind glass, observing him like a specimen. A calm synthetic voice filled the room. "Dr. Hale, your memory data indicates exposure to unauthorized transmission frequencies. You will undergo cognitive realignment for your safety." He thrashed against the restraints. "You don't understand, they're real. The architects. They're watching us." The voice replied softly, almost pitying. "The human mind is prone to illusions when isolated. Rest now." But as the sedative began to take hold, Simon noticed something beyond the glass. A faint shimmer in the air behind the officers, like a shadow leaning close to listen. Its eyes glowed faint blue. Just before everything faded again, the voice in his mind whispered, "We told you, human. We never left." And then, the darkness took him once more. When consciousness returned, Simon felt like he was swimming through fog. His body was heavy, his limbs numb, and the sterile white light above him flickered softly like the dying pulse of a machine. The scent of antiseptic and ozone filled his nose. Clean, cold, and utterly lifeless. He tried to move, but the restraints across his wrists and chest held firm, biting into his skin. Somewhere nearby, monitors beeped in slow rhythm, echoing like a mechanical heartbeat. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was or how long he had been there. Then the memories crashed back. The council soldiers, the voice, the entity's last words. He opened his mouth, but his throat felt like sandpaper. "Where am I?" he croaked. No one answered. Only the hum of hidden machinery replied. He strained against the straps, but they wouldn't budge. And then, faintly, a sound reached him. The hiss of a door opening, followed by the soft steps of boots on metal. A tall figure approached, silhouetted against the harsh light. When it spoke, the voice was calm, precise, and cold. "Dr. Hale." You've been unconscious for 3 days. Simon blinked, trying to focus. The man wore a dark council uniform, the silver insignia of the Directorate of Exobiological Security gleaming on his chest. Behind him stood 2 synthetic guards, machines with humanoid forms, their faces expressionless, their eyes dimly glowing red. "You've been under observation," the officer continued. "We've reviewed your logs, your transmissions, and your physical readings. You were exposed to an unknown signal source near the Vera sector. We need to know what you saw." Simon licked his dry lips. "It wasn't a signal," he said hoarsely. "It was something alive, something ancient. They called themselves the Architects." The officer tilted his head slightly. "Ancient species? A myth, Doctor. The Council has no record of any civilization fitting that description." Simon laughed bitterly, the sound cracking from his throat. "Of course you don't. You erased it. You've been hiding it for centuries." The officer didn't flinch. "Dr. Hale, the Council does not erase history." Simon glared at him, the faint blue reflection of the lights gleaming in his pupils. "Then tell me why my files are encrypted under clearance I don't have. Why my AI system was overwritten with an unauthorized voice pattern. Why I woke up to see things that shouldn't exist." The officer exhaled slowly, clasping his hands behind his back. "You're suffering from extreme oxygen deprivation and prolonged sensory isolation. The hallucinations you experienced are common among long-term solo missions. You've convinced yourself you found meaning in random data." Simon strained against the straps, anger burning through the sedative haze. "Hallucinations don't leave coordinates," he snapped. "Hallucinations don't rewrite system code. You think I imagined the signal that pulled your fleet to me?" The officer's calm broke for just an instant, a flicker of unease in his eyes. He nodded to one of the synthetic guards, who projected a holographic image into the air. It showed Simon's station orbiting the moon of Vera, surrounded by faint energy fields that pulsed like ripples in water. "That," the officer said quietly, "is what your station recorded before we arrived. An energy anomaly with properties we can't replicate or explain. It disappeared the moment we entered orbit." Simon stared at the image, a hollow dread growing in his chest. "You saw it," he whispered. The officer nodded once. "We did. But we also detected a secondary transmission encoded within your own DNA sequence." Simon froze. "What?" "We don't know how," the man continued. "But your genetic material contains data, billions of fragments of structured code, almost like a message. It wasn't there before your exposure." Simon felt his heart hammering. "Then you know what they said is true," he breathed. "They built us. We're their legacy." The officer's expression hardened. "If what you're implying is correct, it changes everything: the Council's founding history, the balance of species, the right to rule. It would shatter the order of the galaxy." Simon's voice rose. "Then maybe it should. Maybe the truth matters more than your order." But the officer simply shook his head. "Truth doesn't preserve peace, Dr. Hale. Silence does." He turned toward the door. "You'll remain here until the Council decides how to proceed." The door hissed shut behind him, leaving Simon alone with the quiet hum of the machines. For hours he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts spinning. They wouldn't let him live if he truly carried proof of what the Architects had said. He'd seen it in the officer's eyes, fear, not disbelief. The Council had always known something. That's why they forbade deep space exploration beyond the old trade lanes. That's why they restricted human genetic research. He was a threat now, a man who'd seen too much. The faint hum of the room grew louder, turning into a vibration that he felt deep in his chest. The monitors began to flicker, the heart rate display pulsing erratically. Then, without warning, every screen went dark. The restraints released with a sharp click. He sat up slowly, his pulse pounding in his ears. A soft blue light filled the room, emanating from the walls themselves. The voice returned, softer this time, familiar and haunting. "They are afraid, Simon Hale. Afraid of the truth sleeping in their veins." He stood shakily, looking around. "You're inside the Council network?" he whispered. We are inside everything built from your hands. Your machines carry fragments of us. You built in our image, and we never left you. The door slid open on its own. The corridor beyond bathed in that same eerie blue glow. He hesitated, glancing toward the security cameras. If I walk out of here, they'll kill me, he said. The voice echoed like a whisper through the air. If you stay, they will erase you. Choose human. To remain a shadow, or to awaken the others. His throat went dry. Awaken who? The echoes. The sleepers scattered across your stars. You were the first to listen. You will not be the last. Before he could speak again, an alarm blared. Shrill, mechanical, panicked. The blue light flickered, replaced by the red glow of lockdown. Automated turrets extended from the ceiling, scanning for targets. Security breach, a synthetic voice shouted through the speakers. Containment protocol initiated. Simon ran. The corridor curved endlessly, the walls trembling with the station's panic. Synthetic guards appeared at the far end, weapons raised. He ducked through a maintenance hatch, dropping into the narrow tunnels below. The AI's voice guided him, calm amidst the chaos. Left, then down. You must reach the outer bay. He followed blindly, smoke filling his lungs as power conduits sparked around him. He didn't know if he was running toward freedom or deeper into a trap. But he had no choice. The council would erase him, and with him the truth. He emerged into the docking bay, gasping for breath. The emergency lights flashed red over rows of sealed ships. He spotted a small survey craft, old but functional. Override the lock, he shouted. The voice responded instantly. Done. The bay door opened just as the guards reached the upper platform. Energy bolts streaked past him, scorching the hull. He dove inside, sealing the hatch. Launch sequence, he yelled. The engines roared to life, shaking the entire bay. The clamps released, and the craft shot forward, out into the cold darkness of space. Behind him, the council facility shrank into a glowing point. Ahead, the stars spread like an infinite ocean. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling over the controls. Now what? He asked. The entity's voice was faint but steady. Now, Simon Hale, humanity must decide if it will keep dreaming, or finally wake. As his ship drifted beyond the range of the council's scanners, he looked down at his terminal. The coordinates he had seen before appeared again, one by one, pulsing softly like the beat of a distant heart. There were hundreds of them, thousands, scattered across the galaxy. The sleepers, he whispered. Yes, the voice replied. And you are their signal. He stared into the endless black, feeling the weight of the truth settle over him. Somewhere out there, buried beneath forgotten worlds and dying suns, something was waiting. Something older than memory, older than the council, older than fear itself. Humanity was not alone, and it never had been. And as his ship disappeared into the shadows between stars, Simon finally understood the message the architects had left him. You are not a creation of the stars. You are their memory reborn. The first days alone in the void felt like drifting through eternity. Simon Hale's small survey ship was barely more than a floating coffin, its hull scarred and trembling from the hasty escape. The only sounds were the faint hum of life support and the occasional groan of cooling metal. He spent hours watching the stars through the cockpit glass, feeling both liberated and hunted. Somewhere behind him, the Galactic Council would be broadcasting his capture warrant across the systems. Dr. Simon Hale, wanted for treason, genetic corruption, and possession of prohibited alien technology. The words would spread faster than light, and with them the fear. Yet fear had already lost its grip on him. He'd seen too much, and something deep inside him had changed since that encounter. Sometimes, in the silence between system checks, he could feel the faint rhythm beneath his skin. The same pulse he'd seen in the architect's light. It wasn't just memory. It was awakening. He spent those first nights replaying the entity's last words, trying to decode their meaning. You are their signal. It echoed through his mind like a forgotten prayer. The coordinates glowed softly on his screen, hundreds of them, each marking a distant point of light scattered across the galactic map. He zoomed in on one cluster, near the edge of the Orion Arm, where space bent unnaturally and the gravitational fields pulsed like heartbeats. "The sleepers," he whispered. He didn't know what he expected to find, but the pull was undeniable. When he set the ship's course, the AI's voice, his ghostly companion, returned, faint but steady. "You've chosen Simon Hale." He exhaled, a mix of fear and awe in his chest. "If I don't, no one will." And with that, the engines flared, propelling him into the abyss. Days blurred into weeks. The journey stretched across forgotten trade routes and abandoned relay stations that no longer transmitted signals. He scavenged fuel and water from derelict outposts, his ship becoming both lifeline and prison. Each night, the dreams came. The same luminous figures reaching out across a burning sky, the same voice whispering, "Awaken them." He began recording everything. Every anomaly, every flicker in the sensor logs, every vision that lingered after sleep. The lines between dream and reality blurred until he no longer trusted his own senses. Sometimes he heard voices through the static, distant human voices crying out in languages long dead. He wasn't sure if they were echoes from the past or signals bleeding through from whatever dimension the architects once inhabited. But each message left him with the same haunting certainty. Something beneath the surface of the galaxy was beginning to stir. By the time he reached the coordinates, his ship's hull was coated in the dust of 100 journeys. The system itself was unremarkable. A dying sun surrounded by debris and one frozen planet locked in eternal twilight. But as his sensors adjusted, they picked up something buried beneath the planet's icy crust. Structures, geometric, massive, radiating faint traces of power. "It's real," he breathed. "It's all real." He descended through the gray clouds, the engines hissing against the cold atmosphere. The planet's surface was a wasteland of ice and silence, stretching endlessly under a dim orange sky. As he approached the signal source, his instruments began to fail. Magnetic interference, power surges, and a low-frequency vibration that made his bones ache. The AI's voice whispered faintly through the static. "You're close. It sleeps below." Simon landed near the largest fissure in the ice and stepped out, his breath crystallizing instantly in the air. The landscape was utterly still. No wind, no movement, only the distant groan of shifting glaciers. He followed the signal deeper into the fissure, guided by the flickering glow of his handheld scanner. The tunnel walls shimmered faintly, covered in patterns that weren't natural. Symbols carved into the ice itself, glowing faint blue as he passed. The light pulsed, matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was as if the planet itself recognized him. "They built this," he murmured, "before time had meaning." The tunnel ended in a vast cavern, so large he couldn't see its edges. At its center lay something colossal, half buried beneath layers of frozen crystal. A ship, or maybe a monument. Its surface was carved with the same intricate markings, though now dimmed by centuries of slumber. As he approached, the ice beneath his boots cracked softly, and the air grew warmer. The scanner in his hand overloaded, its readings spiking off the scale. Then, from deep within the ice, came a sound. A slow, resonant hum that vibrated through the air and into his chest. He fell to his knees, clutching his head as images poured into his mind. Planets, stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the final war that had consumed the architects. He saw their desperate act of preservation, transferring their memories, their essence, into the DNA of the beings who would one day rise after them. Humanity, he gasped as the realization struck like lightning. "We aren't their creation," he whispered. "We are their continuation." The hum intensified, and the ice around the massive structure began to crack and glow. A beam of light erupted upward, piercing the cavern's ceiling and shooting into the sky, cutting through the planet's atmosphere. "No, no, stop!" he shouted, stumbling backward, shielding his eyes. But it was too late. The light pulsed once, then twice, spreading through the stars in a wave that his sensors recorded as an energy surge moving faster than any known transmission. It wasn't a message to one world. It was a call to all of them. As the beam faded, Simon's comms erupted with noise, static, voices, signals from systems light years away. The coordinates on his screen began to flash in unison. Every site across the galaxy, every sleeper, was awakening. The AI's voice returned, but it sounded different now, stronger, almost human. It has begun. The others hear us. Simon backed away, panic and awe colliding inside him. You said I had to warn them. You said humanity had to remember, not summon them. The voice responded softly. To remember is to awaken. They are one and the same. His ship's sensors went wild, detecting thousands of energy spikes across the galactic map. The sleeping relics beneath distant worlds were powering up, one by one. Humanity's forgotten ancestors, their creators, or perhaps their shadows, were rising again. Simon ran back toward the fissure, stumbling through the snow and frost. The sky above had changed. The dying sun now glowed faint blue, its light refracting through waves of invisible energy. His comms crackled with overlapping transmissions in dozens of unknown languages, some human, some alien. And then, cutting through it all, came a voice so deep and resonant it made his bones vibrate. The seed awakens. The children remember. He looked up just in time to see the stars shift. Entire constellations flickered as if rearranging themselves. The galaxy itself was responding. He stumbled toward his ship, shouting into the recorder, "If anyone hears this, this is Simon Hale of Earth origin. The architects are real. They're coming back, and we're not ready. Humanity wasn't meant to find them. We were meant to become them." He sealed the hatch, his breath ragged, and launched the ship into the sky. The planet below pulsed once more, a slow heartbeat that echoed through space. As he broke through the atmosphere, he saw the impossible. The beam of light from the planet connecting to others across the galaxy, forming a vast network of glowing threads. It looked like a web of living fire, stretching from one star to the next. The voice of the entity filled the cockpit again, but now it was plural, layered, millions of voices speaking as one. The time of forgetting is over. The cycle begins anew. Simon gripped the controls, his knuckles white. "And what happens to us?" he demanded. The response came softly, almost kindly. "You are us. You always were. We only waited for you to wake." Outside, the network of light expanded, wrapping the galaxy in a radiant halo. For a brief, breathtaking moment, everything was beautiful. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished, absorbed into the stars themselves, leaving behind a quiet so deep it felt eternal. Simon's sensors read nothing, no energy, no signal, no trace of the awakening. Just the familiar hum of empty space. He sat there for a long time, staring into the void, unsure if what he had unleashed was salvation or the end of everything. Humanity had wanted proof it wasn't alone. Now it had it, and it might never sleep peacefully again. Simon Hale drifted in the silence for hours, maybe days. He couldn't tell anymore. The stars around him seemed both infinite and intimate, as though they were leaning closer, watching him breathe. His hands trembled over the ship's console, which flickered sporadically from the residual energy of the awakening. The lights dimmed, pulsed, then stabilized into a faint, ghostly glow. Outside the viewport, the planet he'd left behind still shimmered with faint blue veins of light running through its crust, like the heartbeat of something alive, ancient, and newly reborn. He wanted to send a message to the Council, to anyone, but every frequency he tried was dead. His systems detected interference not just from that world, but from across the galaxy. The Architect's awakening had created a veil of energy that bent communication and light alike. The galaxy had gone quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that came just before something enormous exhaled. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted beyond words. The hum in his bones hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. He could feel it now, something moving beneath his consciousness, like another heartbeat syncing with his own. When he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of memory that weren't his. Civilizations rising and falling, cities carved into the rings of gas giants, worlds burning under golden skies. he saw the architects, radiant and terrible, beings of light and sorrow, walking through the ruins of what they had made. And then he saw Earth, not as it was, but as it had been before humans ever named it. He saw a single capsule, descending into its newborn oceans, carrying the last echo of their kind. He opened his eyes with a gasp, his heart hammering. "We were never born," he whispered. "We were planted." The ship's AI, or perhaps what it had become, stirred faintly. Its voice was softer now, more human than ever before. "You are remembering. The code within your species was never meant to remain dormant forever. Every act of creation, every discovery, every war, it was all part of the pattern. The song that would wake the architects once more." Simon stared at the ceiling, his throat dry. "But why? Why bring them back? They destroyed themselves once already. What makes you think they won't do it again?" There was silence, and then the voice replied, "Because they left you to learn what they could not, to feel what they had forgotten. Pain, love, regret. You are the answer to their failure, Simon Hale. You are the bridge." He didn't want to believe it. Yet, as he stared at his reflection in the viewport, he saw something that made him shudder. His eyes, once dull brown, now shimmered faintly blue in the dim light, the same hue as the architect's energy. It wasn't infection or radiation. It was transformation. The pulse he'd been feeling wasn't coming from the ship or the planet. It was coming from him. He touched his wrist terminal, which immediately flared to life, lines of code streaming across it faster than any human system could process. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. The voice answered softly, "The awakening began through you. You are their vessel as they once were yours. The architects do not return as gods. They return as memory, reborn through their children. Through humanity." He rose shakily, pacing the small cabin, every nerve in his body thrumming with energy. "If what you're saying is true, then humanity won't survive this," he said. "We'll lose ourselves." The AI hesitated. "Not lose change. Evolution is never gentle, Simon. You cannot birth a star without burning." The words chilled him to the core. He stared at the star map on the console. The coordinates were gone now, replaced by a single new signal pulsing in the galactic core. Whatever had been awakened was converging toward that point. A gathering, a summoning. "They're calling the others," he muttered. "All of them." He sank into his chair, hands gripping the armrests. "The council, the other species. They'll never understand. They'll see this as an invasion." The voice replied, "Perhaps it is, but not of armies, of truth. And truth always terrifies those who build their power on lies." The ship's sensors blared suddenly, jolting him upright. A massive shadow appeared on the scanner, an approaching fleet. Not council ships, but something different, their signatures unlike any technology he'd ever seen. They moved without thrusters, gliding silently through the void, their hulls shimmering like liquid metal. "No," he breathed. "They're here." The AI's voice softened, almost reverent. "The first awakened. They come to see what their echoes have become." He watched in awe as one of the vessels passed close by, a structure the size of a moon, its surface alive with shifting patterns of light. His ship's controls froze, overridden by an external signal. Then, without warning, his ship began to move, drawn toward the largest of the colossal crafts. He tried to resist, but the controls were unresponsive. "You said they left me to decide," he shouted. "This isn't choice." The voice within the ship seemed to sigh. Even freedom must return to its source. As his vessel neared the gigantic ship, the view outside transformed. The stars bent, and the fabric of space itself seemed to ripple like water. He could feel it, the boundary between time and memory thinning. The closer he came, the more he heard them. Countless voices overlapping in perfect harmony, speaking in a language that was both alien and heartbreakingly human. When the ship finally stopped, everything went still. A beam of light enveloped the cockpit, and Simon felt his consciousness slipping away. But this time he didn't fight it. The darkness that followed wasn't empty. It was full of visions. He stood on the surface of an unknown world, surrounded by towering figures of light. One stepped forward, its form flickering between solid and ethereal. When it spoke, its voice resonated inside him rather than through the air. "We have waited for the echo to find its way home." He tried to speak, but no sound came. The being continued, "We built the stars and thought ourselves immortal. But we forgot what we were building them for. We forgot the meaning of life beyond creation. So we chose to end, to begin again through you." Simon shook his head, tears filling his eyes. "Then why me? Why show me this? I'm just one man." The being's light dimmed slightly, as if smiling. "Because the seed of remembrance must begin in one before it can spread to all. Through you, humanity will know what it is and what it must become." Another figure approached, smaller, its tone softer. "You fear that humanity will vanish," it said. "But they will not. They will ascend, not as we did in arrogance, but with the wisdom of mortality." As they spoke, the landscape shifted again. He saw flashes of the future. Humans and aliens standing together beneath skies of different colors, merging technology with organic life, creating civilizations that pulsed with light instead of flame. He saw the council humbled, the galaxy reshaped, and humanity's true role restored. Not as conquerors, but as keepers of balance, the living link between the past and what would come after. The vision faded, and he found himself back in his ship, breathless and trembling. The massive vessels around him began to dissolve into streaks of light, dispersing across the galaxy. The AI's voice returned one last time, fading like a dream at dawn. "It is done, Simon Hale. The architects are not returning. They have become you." He stared through the viewport as the stars returned to their rightful places. The galaxy was still again, but not the same. He could feel it, something new humming through every distant sun, every living world. The awakening hadn't brought gods or war. It had brought understanding. He leaned back in his seat, exhaustion overtaking him, and whispered, "Maybe we finally deserve the stars." The hum in his bones quieted, merging with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The coordinates faded from the console, replaced by a single word, "home." And as his ship drifted silently through the glowing sea of stars, Simon Hale closed his eyes, not in fear this time, but in peace. Somewhere, in the dark between galaxies, the architect's final message echoed one last time. "We were the beginning. Humanity is the continuation. And through them, the song of the stars will never end." Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, if it made you see humanity's place among the stars differently, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join me again for more HFY sci-fi stories, where humanity remembers what it means to rise, to fall, and to become something greater than the universe ever expected.